Okay, C Block, here we go. I'm going to answer the first 10 questions that I got so far, and I feel like your questions are actually going to cover a lot of ground. If by tomorrow there are any other questions that are asked that I feel everybody could benefit from, then I will shoot another quick video. But here we go. Um, so Kenny asked, why does Henry say that he believes in sleep when asked if he believes in victory or defeat by the priest? Kenny, thank you for the page number, by the way. That was super helpful to just reference it. If you guys have the ability to do that in the future, that would be great. It's not a big deal. If not, I can certainly find what I'm looking for, but it makes it easier and quicker for me. So I think this is just Henry's way of saying that he's tired, but it absolutely definitely reflects the Hemingway hero, the modernist sort of non-belief in religion. He believes in sleep. That's a thing you can do. It's not an abstract ideology that really isn't backed up by something credible, right? Sleep makes you feel better. It's a scientific fact, right? He doesn't have, the Hemingway heroes don't have faith or belief in abstract notions like faith, hope, right? And he kind of goes off on this tangent after speaking with Gino, we see, right? When he said he doesn't believe in abstract qualities like courage, bravery. So that really just emphasizes the Hemingway hero piece. Fabian, I know the details. You asked, like, what is going on? Where are they going? What's happening? Basically, let me break it down for you what these three chapters kind of contain in terms of setting. Henry returns to where he came from, right? Where he was at book one, in the beginning of book one. And he returns to his old room with Rinaldi. But this time, everybody's already out on the front. War is happening. It had kind of just he really had just experienced it in book one at the very beginning. It's been a brutal summer of battling, and everybody is wiped out, including Rinaldi. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But his first job is to replace Gino, right? To go up to where this ambulance driver Gino is and say, hey, I'm taking over for you, so Gino can report to another location. And then Frederick Henry takes the men that Gino was managing. They head back to their headquarters, and there's a note on Frederick Henry's ambulance saying, report to Pordenon. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. So at the end, that's what they're prepping for. It's probably late at night, and Frederick Henry tells them, let's get some rest because they have to drive to this new location to prepare for an upcoming battle where there are sure to be injuries and people who are going to need transport to the hospital. So that's what's going on there. Hopefully that is helpful information. Bridget, I don't understand who the new people at the end of chapter 27 are and what their purpose was. How did they end up there and why? So I believe you are talking about Amo, Bonello, and Piani. These were Gino's guys, right? Frederick Henry came in, took over for Gino, and these are the three guys that are working under Frederick Henry. So they're the ambulance drivers. Like I just said in answering Fabiana's question, it's now their job to report to another location to prepare for upcoming casualties, injuries, stuff like that. Okay. So that's sort of what's happening there. Gino, again, we're not going to see Gino again. He's just a guy that Frederick Henry was chatting with and ultimately replacing in this situation. Alexa, you asked, is Frederick Henry dreaming of Catherine so vividly, perhaps a deeper sign of something? Sure. I mean, you could be gleaning an insight that I hadn't thought of. I think that you are definitely hitting the target when it says like showing his weakness and how much he loves her. This is not the same Frederick Henry in book one. His purpose in the war was different in book one, and now things have changed dramatically in his life. Not only does he have somebody worth living for in Catherine, she has a growing life inside of her. And so obviously his perspective on the war is going to be very different, right? The other thing I was going to ask Alexa was, I don't know if you read ahead If you didn't, if you did, you didn't. That's totally fine. But in chapter 29, you're going to see his stream of consciousness where he talks about her and where he kind of goes off on a tangent. And it is certainly where we're showing distraction. We're showing a lack of motivation, a changed attitude, and that's going to certainly affect how he approaches situations in war. And you're going to see that play out in a big way at the end of book 3. Who are the girls and why are they with the soldier? So again, you could be talking about 25 through 27. Those girls are prostitutes, and they're moving them as the battlefield geography changes. The women go along with, so that they're nearby, so that the men have something to distract them. If you're talking about later in book 3, in the later chapters, the virgins, we'll get to that next week. But yes, those women in 26 or 27, I think, they are prostitutes. Chapter 25, Marissa, you're just kind of like, yeah, it's, you just get thrown in. And remember, like, it's okay to be confused about the details here, because just think back to that Hemingway credo of, I want to represent life as it is. So we're a fly on the wall in this situation, and there is a lot of inferencing that needs to be made, and so it's okay to not have all of the details straight on this. Don't worry about that. But again, he's returned to his post after being in Milan, and he's waiting for his orders. But at first, he spends time catching up with Rinaldi. He hasn't seen him all summer. And Rinaldi, in case you guys were wondering, is not in a good place, right? He's seen some brutal things. He's a surgeon, so he's seen the worst of the worst in terms of having to come in and try to salvage what's left of people's dismembered bodies. And so he is really discouraged. On top of the fact that Rinaldi thinks he has syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease. So he's, again, in a really bad place, and that's reflected in the way he behaves. He gets really drunk that night that Frederick Henry returns. So that's just kind of what's going on there. Grace, the clarification about the meaning of rain and mist. Oh, it's such a big deal. So I actually attached the worksheet that we would have done in class after reading book 3. If you are wondering about that, this chapter from a book called How to Read Literature Like a Professor talks about the significance of rain, and what rain can symbolize. So reading that might be helpful. But it's on a couple of different levels. So it can be a reflection of Frederick Henry's mood, absolutely, in terms of like reflecting his state of mind, his depression. He's cloudy, he's unsure. It also adds to the misery of the environment, right? The war, that like on top of being in this incredibly undesirable situation, the weather is also terrible. I mean, think about what the situation we're in right now. The days where it's beautiful out and we can get outside, even if it's just in our front yard, they pass by much faster. They're much easier to deal with than those rainy days where you feel kind of stuck inside. So imagine being at war and being in that situation, right? It just adds to the misery factor. It's also a symbolic indication of what the men are feeling, right? Everybody is discouraged. The priest is discouraged. The soldiers are discouraged. Not a lot of these people want to be in this fight, and yet here they are. So there's a lot of that going on. Brian, you were talking and asking about the conversation with the priest, as was, hold on, Richard, right? So I'm going to try to tackle both of those at the same time. Brian, right? How does the priest think the war will end? Right, it's kind of unclear. They're both anxious. And they both oppose the war, right? What information does this dialogue reveal? Both good questions. I don't know if I'm 100% right on this. My interpretation is that this is a great window into the insight of Frederick Henry and even Hemingway's perspective on religion, faith, right? The priest is Hemingway's sort of commentary of the religious institution as a whole. The priest is naive. He's sweet. He's ignorant. And it's not that Frederick Henry, or Hemingway for that matter, look at religion in a disrespectful way, in a condescending way. They look at it as sort of, they don't agree with these ideas. They go against what the Hemingway hero believes in. Again, those absolute values don't exist, right? And so the priest, he thinks about things in a hopeful way, right? Like, oh, maybe both sides will just give up. And Frederick Henry is very logical and tactical. And he's like, that's not how life works. So we see sort of how these ideals clash. And while Frederick Henry can respect the priest for having these thoughts, he doesn't agree with him. He's not a tactician, right? Religion is not going to get them out of this war. And I think that's sort of reflected with the conversation with the priest. But it shows that I still think, again, there's that respect there where he likes having these conversations with the priest, even if he doesn't agree with him, even if he doesn't believe in God, he still appreciates what the priest has to offer in terms of his point of view and in terms of somebody who's always going to be loyal, right? And wanting to support, even if that support isn't helpful to the men. We see that with Rinaldi. Rinaldi is very bitter about there's the difference between Frederick Henry and Rinaldi and the way that they interact with the priest. Another person in my F block asked about Rinaldi talking about St. Paul. And St. Paul, I had to do some research on it, was like basically the second most important person in Christianity behind Jesus Christ. And Rinaldi is sort of sarcastically toasting to St. Paul, and St. Paul was this sort of, he's the one that really implemented a lot of Christian values in terms of, being frugal, being against passion and acting on passion and lust and all that stuff. And we know Rinaldi's a very passionate, lustful man. So we also see how religion goes against Rinaldi's values as well. Why did Frederick not want to talk with Catherine about Rinaldi? Going into that, Rinaldi wants to talk about the dirty details. And Catherine is not an object to Frederick Henry anymore. He loves her, and he's not interested in engaging in, talking dirty about the woman he loves. And he doesn't want Rinaldi to give him a hard time about it either, so he just wants to avoid the topic altogether. And Rinaldi's a little salty about that, but he's not, to be clear, because I think somebody else asked, like, is Rinaldi still into Catherine? No. He's jealous of what Frederick Henry has with Catherine. He's not jealous that Frederick Henry has Catherine herself. So he's perhaps a little bit bitter that Frederick Henry has found love, but it's certainly not that he was never in love with Catherine. So that's not an issue, right? Because first and foremost, Rinaldi basically looks at Frederick Henry like a little brother. And so that's where we see the ribbing, the joking around, the teasing, but also the affection that Rinaldi has. I mean, for those of you that have a younger sibling, if you think about the way that you act with them, I smothered my little sister with affection and also teasing and all of that kind of stuff. I think that is all of the questions. Hopefully that's helpful for you, just to give you an idea of what you are getting into with the rest of book 3. Be prepared for a pivot, for a change in gears, for really action and plot to start happening. The 3 men that are with Henry are going to continue to be with him. Amo, Frederick Henry really likes. Amo's a man like him, right? I don't need to sleep. I can work. He's amiable. Bonello and Piani are likable, but not, if we're talking about loyal to a small few, we're thinking Frederick Henry, if he had to choose between these 3 guys, he would choose Amo. So we're going to see them deal with an incredibly difficult retreat given the setting, and some things are going to happen, and Frederick Henry's going to have to make some quick decisions that are going to change the trajectory of where this story is going dramatically. So obviously you're going to be reading the rest of book 3 for the next week. Continue, send those questions to me. consider that you can just send me a question as soon as you have one, that you don't have to read the whole thing, then do the assignment, then ask the question. So that the sooner I get the questions, the quicker I can answer them. So the better you can move through the book with an understanding. Hopefully this helps, guys. Hopefully you're hanging in there. And if you have any other questions, I will definitely go on and answer them on Google Classroom. Okay, see ya.